South Africa's victory over apartheid gave it this incredible moral authority on the world stage. But a recent critique is asking a tough question. Is that moral compass still pointing true? It really gets you thinking about the legacy of that historic struggle. And this line from our source material, wow. It cuts right to the heart of the debate. It asks if a celebrated, hard-won past is now being used as, and I'm quoting here, camouflage for hypocrisy. So, what we're going to do here is unpack this critique. It's aimed at South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, and the argument is that its foreign policy is starting to apply its moral principles, well, a bit selectively. And that's a charge that directly challenges the nation's moral inheritance. So what exactly do we mean by moral inheritance? Well, think of it as the global credibility, the ethical authority a nation earns through its own fight for justice. For South Africa, this authority was literally forged in the fire of the anti-apartheid movement. It gave them this incredibly powerful, respected voice on human rights all over the world. Now, to really get the weight of today's criticism, you have to go back. You have to revisit the struggle that built that authority in the first place. Because the critique of South Africa's present is just so deeply rooted in its brutal, but ultimately triumphant past. The whole system of apartheid, made official back in 1948, led to decades of oppression. And there were these flashpoints of absolutely shocking violence, like the Sharpeville Massacre in 1960 and the Soweto Uprising in 1976. These weren't just domestic tragedies. No, these were moments that horrified the entire international community. They really galvanized that global fight for freedom, a fight that finally triumphed with those landmark democratic elections in 1994. Let's just zero in on Sharpeville for a moment. On that day, police just opened fire on thousands of unarmed protesters. The official death toll was 69. That number, it became a global symbol of the regime's brutality. It was a definitive turning point in the struggle. And the true horror of that day is really captured in one chilling detail from the physician reports. The vast majority of victims, we're talking over 70%, were shot in the back. That tells you they were fleeing when they were killed. And that single fact was absolutely crucial in framing the event for the world, not as some kind of riot, but as what it was, a massacre. It was events just like Sharpeville that sparked these massive waves of international outrage. And all that solidarity, it fueled sanctions, boycotts in sports and culture, and just deepened South Africa's isolation. The anti-apartheid movement gained this immense moral authority, an authority that the new democratic nation would one day inherit. And that hard-won legacy, well, it brings us right back to the present, and to the core of this critique. The source material we're looking at points to some recent foreign policy decisions that, it argues, stand in pretty stark contrast to the very principles that brought the world to South Africa's side in the first place. Okay, the first point of contention raised is Iran. The article points out that while there have been reports detailing the killing and violent suppression of thousands of civilian protesters, the South African government hasn't offered any clear, unequivocal condemnation. And right here, the critique really sharpens to a point of direct comparison. So on one side, you have South Africa taking this very public, principled stand against Israel at the International Court of Justice. But then on the other side, the article points to silence on protester deaths in Iran and even joint naval exercises with the Iranian regime. The author's conclusion from this contrast is pretty blunt. It suggests a foreign policy that's being driven less by consistent moral conviction and more by strategic alignments and what the author calls geopolitical convenience. So, what's really at stake here? Well, the argument is that this perceived inconsistency doesn't just raise a few questions. It actively threatens to erode South Africa's unique global standing and its incredibly hard-won moral inheritance. And as our source material puts it, moral authority is not inherited permanently. It is sustained only through action. That really suggests that a nation's moral reputation isn't some trophy you put on a shelf. It's a standard that has to be met, continuously. Which brings us to this fundamental question, really, for any nation with a legacy like this. Is the moral high ground you gained from a historic struggle, is that a permanent status? Or is it something that has to be re-earned, day after day, through every single political decision? The critique ends with a really powerful and kind of sobering warning. History will remember the difference. It's a thought-provoking end that leaves all of us to consider the future of a nation's moral compass on what is a very complex world stage.